Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we drift slowly through the cobbled streets of ancient Rome. The air smells faintly of crushed thyme and donkey sweat, the kind of scent that clings to marble statues and young boys carrying scrolls. You hear sandals scuffing against stone, the creak of old wooden carts, and distant vendors arguing about the price of olives that are all, frankly, identical. Somewhere nearby, a priest is chanting in Latin, which sounds very impressive even though he's really just mumbling about clouds. You don't know it yet, but just a few blocks over, in a relatively clean townhouse for the Subura district, a rather skinny boy with a sharp nose is about to start his homework. His name? Gaius Julius Caesar. You probably won't survive this city, but he will. Mostly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the noise of Rome, the kind of noise that doesn't exactly yell, it drones. Oxen lowing, people shouting, fountains bubbling like someone forgot to turn them off. The year is around 90 BCE. You glance up at a building that smells like garlic and ambition, and you spot him, little Julius, age 10, wrapped in a toga that seems slightly too big, fussing over a wax tablet and frowning as if it owes him money. He's not famous yet. Right now, he's mostly just a patrician kid whose family has some clout but not enough to avoid chores. His dad, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, because originality isn't really a Roman value, is a mid-level official. Not terribly important, but not selling street cheese either. The young Caesar is already practicing speeches in front of a bronze statue of Jupiter in the atrium. He's decided Jupiter needs to know how he feels about the price of figs. You follow him through a morning ritual that involves far too much olive oil. Roman boys, especially upper-class ones, bathe in public with dramatic flair. Caesar scrapes sweat and dust off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. It's not glamorous, but he does it like he's being watched. Because in Rome, someone always is. After the bath comes school, which is mostly grammar, rhetoric, and the fine art of not falling asleep while reciting Virgil. Caesar's favorite part is rhetoric. He likes arguing. A lot. Which is good, because eventually he'll do it in front of massive crowds while wearing armor and possibly bleeding. But right now, he's just trying to memorize lines. His tutor, a retired soldier with a limp and a fondness for figs, slaps the desk every time Caesar's attention drifts. Which is often. You notice that Caesar stares out the window a lot, at the bustling forum, at the temple steps, even at birds, as if calculating what it would take to become a bird and fly away from grammar. He's also writing poetry, terribly. We don't have any surviving samples, and this is probably for the best. Now and then, you see glimpses of the adult Caesar. A spark in his eyes when someone mentions politics. The way he watches the senators go by, measuring them, maybe wondering why so many of them are short. Rome's political world is full of short, angry men, and Caesar is tall, calm, and, though he doesn't know it yet, dangerously charming. At dinner that evening, the family gathers around a low table, reclining slightly, Roman style. They dip bread in wine, chew boiled eggs, and debate public games. Caesar's mother, Aurelia, is sharp and proud. She doesn't smile much, but she watches her son like she knows he's meant for something. Maybe that's why she insists he learn not just Latin and Greek, but also how to walk into a room like he owns it. He practices. Often, the house is small by patrician standards, but elegant. There's a courtyard with a fig tree. Sometimes Caesar climbs it and just sits there, staring out over the roofs of Rome, thinking very serious thoughts about pigeons. You can almost hear his inner monologue. What if we trained pigeons for politics? Night falls, and oil lamps flicker in shallow dishes. The streets quiet slightly. In his bed, Caesar lies awake, thinking of Jupiter, of the Forum, of how good he'll look in a red cloak. He doesn't know about the pirates yet, or the Rubicon, or the fact that his name will someday be synonymous with power, salad, and betrayal. All he knows is that tomorrow he'll recite some terrible poetry to a statue again, and that maybe, just maybe, he'll argue with the tutor about punctuation. It's a soft beginning. Not quite glorious, but quietly electric. Section 2. The first thing you hear is a splash, then laughter, then the echo of an off-key hymn sung by a man who's maybe 2 goblets too deep into fermented grape juice. You're back in Rome, drifting once again past faded temples and down into a neighborhood that smells like boiled lentils and ambition. It's mid-morning, and Caesar, now a little older, maybe 13, is stepping carefully over a puddle left behind by a sleepy aqueduct. He's late for temple again, and the priest at Jupiter's shrine has the patience of an anxious goat. But Caesar isn't too worried. Even at this age, he already walks with that infuriating kind of calm that says, I might be late, but I'm still more important than you. You follow him as he stops at a public bath, not for leisure, but as a detour. Romans, particularly the men, basically live part-time in these places. The thermi is a swirl of steam, gossip, and too many opinions about the upcoming chariot races. Men soak, scrape, oil, and bicker. There's political scheming in the corner, and someone loudly quoting Homer for no apparent reason. Caesar dips into the warm water, nods politely at a retired centurion with terrible tattoos, and then climbs out to be slathered in olive oil by an attendant who smells vaguely like smoked fish. It's an everyday ritual, but it's also a statement. I am Roman, therefore I bathe better than you. Then it's off to the temple, finally. The priest glares as Caesar arrives, mostly dry and only slightly oily. The ritual involves incense, a small offering, and a chant that Caesar mouths but doesn't mean. His relationship with the gods is already negotiable. He's respectful, yes. But deep down, he's more interested in being divine someday than worshipping divinity. He looks at the marble statue of Jupiter the way a teenager might look at an old rock star. Respect, but also a hint of, I could do better. After the temple, he heads into the forum with a swagger just a little too confident for someone whose allowance depends on his mother. The forum is loud, dirty, and buzzing with the kind of energy you get when you pack too many senators, philosophers, pickpockets, and goats into one plaza. You watch him slip through the crowd, absorbing everything. He listens to a fiery public speech about grain prices, then a legal squabble over land boundaries, and then a street musician playing something vaguely Greek. He's not quite participating yet, just learning. Watching how men speak with their hands, raise their voices just enough, and always have a slave nearby to remind them what day it is. On the way home, Caesar passes a small stall selling cheap amulets. One catches his eye, a little bronze eagle with wings outstretched. He doesn't buy it, but he holds it a second longer than necessary before placing it back down. Dinner that night is simple: roasted chickpeas, wilted greens, and bread that's slightly burned on the bottom. His mother asks what he learned. He says, politics is like dice. Most people just don't know when to roll. She arches an eyebrow. She likes that answer. She also reminds him not to get too clever before his voice finishes changing. Later, Caesar sneaks out to the roof. It's cool up here. Quiet. The city's chaos muffled by distance and tile. He lays on the terracotta, staring at stars that twinkle like they're laughing at him. There's a breeze, a faint scent of pine smoke and wet limestone. Somewhere a flute plays, probably terribly, and Caesar smiles to himself that he doesn't say it aloud, but the idea is already in his head. One day, people will chant his name in temples. One day, his statue will be the one others bow to. For now, though, he closes his eyes and lets the rooftop cradle him like a question waiting for an answer. Section 3. The house is quieter now. Caesar is nearing adulthood, and that means more responsibilities, more decisions, and, unfortunately, more family politics. You wake up to find him standing in the atrium, barefoot, staring at his reflection in the polished bronze water basin. His jawline has sharpened, his eyes are more calculating, and he's begun to favor a particular tilt of the head that says, yes, I did say that, and no, I won't be apologizing. But today, something's off. His uncle, well, technically his great-uncle through marriage, is Lucius Cornelius Sulla. And Sulla has just taken control of Rome in the messiest, most passive-aggressively violent way possible. If the Republic were a dinner party, Sulla just flipped the table, stabbed the host, and declared himself in charge of seating arrangements. Caesar's family, particularly on his mother's side, is strongly tied to the populace, the political faction Sulla currently wants to erase with fire and paperwork. A messenger arrives with a scroll and a sigh. Caesar reads the scroll. Then he sighs too. It's an order. Divorce his wife, Cornelia, immediately. She's the daughter of Cinna, one of Sulla's hated enemies. Keeping her makes Caesar look defiant. And Sulla is not a fan of defiance. You watch as Caesar rolls up the scroll with eerie calm. He loves Cornelia. Maybe not in the candlelit, poetic way he once wrote about, but in the loyal, stubborn, I chose this and I'm not backing down way. So when he sends the messenger back with a no, he knows exactly what it means. He's just declared himself an enemy of the state, and that means exile. Or worse. In the middle of the night, Caesar leaves. No dramatic farewells. Just a bag, a cloak, and a vague plan to not die. He slips through alleys and out past the city walls, into a countryside buzzing with summer insects and the ever-present fear of bounty hunters. You follow him through towns where his name is already whispered like a question. He avoids cities, shaves his head to be less recognizable, though unfortunately, the look suits him. Even bald, he has that future dictator energy. At one point, he hides in a shepherd's hut for 2 days. The shepherds are suspicious at first, but Caesar charms them by quoting poetry and helping them track down a missing goat. One of them even offers him cheese as a peace offering. He accepts it solemnly, like it's a diplomatic gift. Word begins to spread. People know Sulla wants him dead, but some admire the stubbornness. That Caesar kid, they mutter, he's got nerve. That may not sound like much, but in Rome, nerve is worth more than gold. Eventually, Sulla relents. Sort of. His advisors reportedly plead with him. Let the boy go. He's too insignificant to matter. Sulla replies, ominously, there are many Mariuses in that boy. It's not a compliment. Marius was Sulla's old enemy. It's more of a prophecy. When the heat dies down, Caesar returns to Rome. He's thinner, tanner, and even more dangerous. He's also now a priest of Jupiter, thanks to some clever political maneuvering and his mother's relentless letter-writing campaign. The role is prestigious, but boring. Lots of sacrificing bulls, interpreting omens, and avoiding anything fun like war or debate. But Caesar doesn't sit still for long. You notice him spending time at the law courts again, watching lawyers duel with words, occasionally smirking when someone botches a quote from Cicero. He's itching for action, and Rome's sleepy rituals aren't quite scratching the itch. One afternoon, you see him in the forum, speaking to a small crowd. Nothing official, just casual commentary on some grain dispute. But he's magnetic. The way he gestures, the pauses he inserts, the subtle sarcasm. Even when he says something deeply mundane, the grain imports from Sicily have been suboptimal, it somehow feels like a prophecy. That night, he returns home, ducks past the atrium, and collapses onto a low couch. He doesn't light a lamp. He just lies there, eyes open, listening to the quiet hum of Rome at rest. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. A drunk stumbles into a fountain. Life goes on, but something's different. He's not just a boy from a political family anymore. He's been hunted, shaved bald, fed by shepherds, and survived a direct order from Sulla. He's starting to believe, quietly, stubbornly, that Rome might someday belong to him. Section 4. The rain is gentle tonight. Not the kind that drenches togas or floods aqueducts, just a soft drizzle that polishes the marble and darkens the clay rooftops. You're following Caesar through a narrow alley in Rome's Purr district. He's wrapped in a plain cloak, put up, walking fast but not quite running. You'd think he was avoiding someone, and you'd be right. Sulla may be gone, dead from liver failure and bad decisions, but the aftershocks of his dictatorship still rattle the city. Caesar's enemies haven't forgotten his defiance. And although his priesthood protected him for a while, political tides shift faster than Roman fashion trends. Tonight, Caesar is officially unemployed. You see, when he was appointed Flamandilis, priest of Jupiter, he had to follow some very specific rules. No riding a horse, no touching metal, no spending a night away from home, no looking at corpses, and, worst of all, no holding political office. It was like being promoted into a very fancy prison made of rules and incense. So when the regime changed, and his appointment was revoked, Caesar was quietly freed. It's not technically exile, but it feels like being unmoored. He has no job, no title, and the political scene is a mess of former sullies trying to pretend nothing happened. But here's the thing. Caesar sees opportunity in chaos. He always does. You trail him as he steps into a small, smoky hall filled with men arguing about law and honor. It's a rhetorical school, one of the less prestigious ones, but still a place where sharp minds get sharper. Caesar takes a seat near the back, listens to a heated debate about land reform, then raises a hand and delivers a short, devastating counterargument. He's not technically invited to speak, but no one stops him. One man chuckles. Another frowns. The moderator just nods slowly and says, "Well, that's one way to phrase it." Over the next few months, you watch Caesar attach himself to a powerful patron, a man named Marcus Thermus, governor of Asia. Caesar's given a junior military post, military tribune, which sounds glamorous, but mostly involves paperwork and yelling at tired soldiers about bridge-building technique. Still, it's a foothold, his first real taste of bloodless power. You travel with him to Bithynia, a small kingdom across the Aegean, where he's sent to negotiate a fleet from King Nicomedes IV. The mission is successful, perhaps too successful. Caesar secures the ships, but rumors swirl about just how close he got to the king in the process. Roman gossip is brutal and accusations of scandal stick, especially when you're young, handsome, and visibly ambitious. He brushes it off. Laughs, even. Later, when he runs for office, enemies will throw the rumor at him during speeches. His response? A shrug and a sharper insult. Caesar doesn't erase attacks, he outshines them. But for now, he's still climbing. You see him in the field again, this time in Asia Minor, helping suppress local revolts. He shows surprising courage, not the loud, sword-waving kind, but the type that keeps marching when everyone else is exhausted. He earns a small honor, the civic crown, a wreath of oak leaves awarded to soldiers who save fellow Romans in battle. It's not the crown he wants, but it's a start. He returns to Rome in a tunic that's a little more worn and a face that's slightly more lined. But his eyes gleam brighter than ever. He's hungry. He survived Sulla, politics, priesthood, and the front lines. And he's just getting started. You find him late one night in the Forum again, standing beneath a flickering torch. He's watching an old statue, one of Romulus, maybe, or some other founder hero, long forgotten. He doesn't speak. But you can tell by the way he stands that he's measuring the distance between where he is and where he intends to be. And the rain has stopped. Section 5. You're on a ship now. The kind of ship that creaks with every wave, smells like salted ropes and unwashed ambition, and is definitely infested with something that crunches. Caesar stands at the prow, cloak whipping in the sea breeze, one hand resting dramatically on the rail. He's headed to Rhodes, not for war or politics, but for school. Because even future dictators need a good oration coach. He's about 25, recently back from his military stint, and determined to master public speaking. Not the boring kind with scrolls and nodding senators, but the kind that stops a crowd, holds them, and then rearranges their opinions like furniture. Caesar wants to study under Apollonius Molon, one of the greatest rhetorical teachers of the era, who's known for turning men into legends and students into nightmares. But the gods, as always, have a sense of humor. Not long after his ship passes the island of Pharmacusa, sails appear on the horizon. Pirates. Cilician pirates, to be precise, professional kidnappers who've been harassing the eastern Mediterranean like it's their full-time job. They board the ship, sneer at Caesar's fine boots, and take him captive. You'd think this would be a low point. But you'd be wrong. Caesar, upon learning that they plan to ransom him for 20 talents of silver, is offended. Outraged. Really? He scoffs and insists they raise the ransom to 50. "Do you even know who I am?" he demands, lounging like a disappointed noble on the floor of their wooden prison. The pirates, amused, agree. They send word to gather the silver, while Caesar makes himself at home. For the next 38 days, you watch something bizarre happen. Caesar becomes the most annoying hostage in history. He walks freely around the pirate camp, shushes them when they talk during his reading, and insists they listen to his speeches. He composes poetry and demands critique. When they laugh at it, he tells them they have no taste. At one point, he joins in their games, wins too often, and suggests they try harder. It's like they've kidnapped a very well-spoken thunderstorm. He also jokes daily that once he's free, he'll hunt them all down and crucify them. The pirates laugh. He laughs. Everyone laughs, except you, because you know he's serious. Eventually, the ransom arrives. Caesar is released, polite to the end. He waves goodbye, reminds them to eat more olives, and immediately charters a fleet. Not a month later, he tracks down the exact same group, captures them, takes back the silver, and then calmly orders their crucifixion. All of them. Though, in a faint flicker of mercy, he has their throats cut first. You know. So it won't be too uncomfortable. Rome hears about this. And Rome remembers, because in a world where most young nobles would have begged or bribed or written pitiful letters to uncles, Caesar staged a one-man comedy show in a pirate camp and then followed it up with vengeance served colder than a morning bath in January. He finally makes it to Rhodes, studies with Apollonius Molon, and perfects the art of pacing, pausing, and persuasion. But let's be honest, he was already halfway there. The pirates were just his first audience. And you? You sit quietly at the edge of the sea, listening to the wind that once carried that ship, wondering how many men realize their legends before they've even taken the stage. Section 6. You're in Rome again, wandering down a street that smells of fried fish and freshly spilled ambition. It's dusk, and the city is turning that particular kind of orange that makes even broken statues look heroic. Caesar has returned, wiser, better dressed, and significantly more dangerous. The pirate affair is already becoming the stuff of whispered tavern tales. But Caesar isn't lingering on the past. He's got plans. And like most Roman plans, they begin with debt. You trail him as he ducks into the atrium of a wealthy patron's house. It belongs to Marcus Crassus, a man whose fortune is so vast it practically has its own postal code. Crassus made much of his wealth by buying burning buildings, then renting out his private fire brigade to the desperate owners. He's not exactly lovable, but he knows talent when he sees it, and he sees it in Caesar. The deal is simple. Crassus funds Caesar's political ambitions, and Caesar gives Crassus influence over the next rising star. It's the Roman version of venture capitalism, but with more laurel wreaths. Caesar's first stop, the position of quaestor, a junior magistrate job, mostly involving finances and paperwork. It's a little dull, a little dusty, and very beneath his talents. But he treats it like a dress rehearsal for world domination. You watch him pore over ledgers, memorize local laws, and, most importantly, charm every single person he meets. Whether it's a tax collector with dandruff or a senator's wife who collects rare birds, Caesar listens, nods, and remembers. Not because he's kind. Because it's useful. The quaestorship sends him to Hispania Ulterior, farther Spain, a rough province with bandits in the hills and bored governors in the cities. There, something odd happens. Amid the dusty roads, barking dogs, and half-ruined temples, Caesar catches a glimpse of a statue. It's of Alexander the Great, tall and brooding, carved mid-stride like he's about to conquer someone just for blinking at him. Caesar stops. Stares. He's roughly the same age Alexander was when he had already conquered half the known world. Caesar, meanwhile, is managing spreadsheets and counting grain shipments. You can almost hear the existential crisis forming in his temples. That he walks away that night a little quieter, a little tighter in the jaw. He doesn't say anything out loud. But he's now running on something more potent than Crassus's gold. Shame-fueled ambition. Back in Rome, he begins the climb in earnest. You see him campaign for Edile, an office responsible for public buildings and entertainment. This is Caesar's element. He throws lavish games, chariot races, mock sea battles, even exotic animals from Numidia. He borrows massive sums to fund them, plunging into debt so deep it makes Crassus sweat. But the public? They adore him. He walks through the forum like he owns it, gives speeches that turn legal disputes into theater. Even his enemies start copying his style, though none of them can quite pull off the "I just casually destroyed your argument and smiled" routine. You catch him one evening standing beside the rostra, the speaker's platform, watching the crowd disperse after a particularly fiery debate. Someone mutters that he's too ambitious. Someone else mutters that he's too good-looking. Both are correct. That night, he returns home to find his household asleep. Oil lamps flicker low, casting long shadows on the walls. Caesar sits down at his writing desk, pulls out a scroll, and begins drafting a speech. Not for tomorrow, not even for next week. He's planning years ahead. His handwriting is neat, sharp, and unhurried. He doesn't blink when he writes the words Pontifex Maximus, High Priest, a prestigious title that could launch him even higher or ruin him completely. You lean back, watching him from the corner of the room. He dips his pen in ink again. Outside, Rome breathes in the dark, and Caesar keeps writing. Section 7. It's morning in Rome, and the city is already humming with that peculiar blend of incense smoke, donkey carts, and faint political panic. You follow Caesar as he steps out into the street, freshly shaved, toga immaculate, and eyes gleaming with that unsettling mix of charm and calculation. Today's not just another day of speeches or Senate wrangling. Today is a gamble. He's campaigning for Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of the Roman state religion. The position isn't just ceremonial. It comes with a fancy house, lifelong influence, and the power to interpret the will of the gods, which is very useful when the gods mysteriously agree with your policies. There's one small problem. Caesar is way too young and way too in debt to be the obvious choice. His opponents are older, richer, and more respectable, which in Roman terms just means less exciting. But Caesar has something they don't: the ability to walk into a crowded square and convince half the audience they've known him since childhood, and the other half that he personally invented honesty. His campaign is bold. Lavish feasts, public festivals, free wine fountains. Yes, literal fountains of wine. Somewhere in the Subura, a man is currently passed out in a barrel after trying to collect a week's worth of free drink. Crassus funds most of it, wincing every time Caesar sends another request for coin. But Caesar promises it'll be worth it. The vote is tense. You can feel it in the air, the way people pause before casting their ballots, the hushed muttering, the suspicious number of pigeons circling the forum. Finally, the results come in. Caesar wins, not just by a little, by a landslide. When he gets the news, he doesn't cheer. He smiles. Quietly. The kind of smile that says, "Of course I did." Then he thanks the gods with a modest sacrifice and goes right back to planning 10 steps ahead. His enemies are rattled. They thought he'd be a passing nuisance, a charming distraction with good hair and no staying power. But now he's the official spiritual authority of Rome. He can veto temple decisions, consecrate land, and, if necessary, stall any political move by declaring a bad omen. It's not power in the sword-swinging sense, but it's power all the same. You see him use it subtly. He doesn't overplay his hand. Just enough reminders that Jupiter might frown upon certain Senate motions. Just enough sacred processions to slow down legislation he dislikes. It's like watching a man steer a chariot with silk reins. Graceful, deceptively strong, but Caesar isn't just playing the priest. He's still networking, charming, and studying every crack in Rome's fragile republic. He attends trials, not as a lawyer, but as an observer, noting which senators squirm under pressure and which ones crack jokes to deflect guilt. He dines with veterans, visits grain warehouses, and learns exactly how much bread it takes to make the city love you. Then one day, as you sit with him near the edge of the forum, a messenger arrives. Caesar listens, frowns, then stands. A family member, his Aunt Julia, widow of Marius, has died. The funeral is grand. At the eulogy, Caesar gives a speech that's part history lesson, part emotional roller coaster, and part subtle self-promotion. He weaves their family's legacy into Rome's own, making sure everyone hears the name Marius alongside his own. The crowd cheers. Senators squirm. Caesar watches, saying nothing. And just like that, another stone is set in the foundation of his future. Not with force, not with scandal, but with story. Because Caesar understands something most of Rome's elite never fully grasped. In a world built on tradition, myth, and theater, the man who controls the narrative controls the empire. That night, you find him standing alone on the Palatine Hill, looking out over the city lights. The temples shimmer faintly, the forum murmurs with after-hours deals, and the stars overhead seem strangely well-aligned. He clasps his hands behind his back, takes a slow breath, and says, to no one in particular, let them chase omens. I'll write them. Section 8. You wake to birdsong and the distant echo of hooves on cobblestone. Rome is bathed in pale morning light, and Caesar is already on the move. His toga sways with practiced ease as he strides through the forum, pausing to nod at vendors, pat a child on the head, and compliment a senator's haircut, whether it deserves it or not. He's officially praetor now, a step below consul, which means he gets to wear fancier shoes and tell more people what to do. He also gets the occasional armed escort and an increasing number of invitations to suspiciously generous dinner parties. But today he's distracted. You follow him to the Senate, where the air is thick with debate over governance, taxes, and how many statues of Jupiter is too many. Caesar sits back, listens, and then delivers a speech about justice so smooth it could have been buttered. The chamber quiets. Even his enemies admit, privately and with great bitterness, that he's annoyingly effective. After the session, he receives a surprising assignment: governorship of Hispania Ulterior again. This time, not as a low-ranking officer, but as the man in charge. He doesn't celebrate. He just packs. Quickly, you travel with him across the dusty plains of Spain, where the roads are bumpier, the laws looser, and the local bandits alarmingly well organized. His entourage includes scribes, soldiers, and one cook who somehow always smells like onions. Caesar spends the long ride drafting reforms and memorizing obscure tax laws. Because nothing says world domination like understanding municipal grain quotas. When he arrives, the region is, well, let's call it ungoverned. Local warlords are running wild. The treasury is nearly empty, and half the population is either rebelling or very close to it. Caesar looks around, rolls up his sleeves, and gets to work that he reorganizes the courts, audits the tax collectors, and, when that fails, replaces them. He rebuilds roads, reestablishes trade, and personally leads a few small campaigns against unruly tribes. You watch him on horseback, cloak snapping in the wind, sword drawn but rarely needed. He fights with strategy, not volume. He also doesn't forget names, of allies, of enemies, even of local cattle traders with good gossip. One battle stands out. A hill fort, small but well defended. Caesar's troops are outnumbered and exhausted. He surveys the terrain, orders a nighttime maneuver that looks suicidal on paper, and somehow, through a mix of timing, luck, and sheer nerve, takes the fort with minimal casualties. His men cheer. He just nods, like, well, of course that worked. And in that moment, something shifts. They stop seeing him as the fancy noble from Rome. They start calling him commander with respect. Then there's the debt. Even here, on the fringes of empire, Caesar's financial situation is complicated. The games, the festivals, the wine fountains, they weren't free. Crassus's loans are looming. So Caesar does something clever. He uses his position to secure wealth, not through theft, but through negotiation. He settles disputes between cities, cuts deals, takes a modest cut, and writes home with the kind of cheerful confidence that makes his creditors extremely nervous. And then, near the end of his governorship, he does something even bolder. He petitions the Senate, while still abroad, for the right to hold a triumph, a military parade, and also to stand for consul. But by law, he can't enter Rome unless he gives up his command. And if he gives up his command, he loses immunity from lawsuits, so he's stuck at a crossroads, literally and politically. You watch him pause outside the city gates. Behind him, veterans cheer, hoping for a parade. Ahead, politics awaits, with daggers disguised as debates. He thinks for a moment, then turns away from the triumph that he chooses consulship, because Caesar isn't in this for gold, or glory, or even applause. He wants control, and he's getting very, very close. Section 9. It's election season in Rome, and the city is louder, dirtier, and somehow even more full of promises than usual. You drift alongside Caesar as he navigates the maze of posters, handshakes, and whispered bribes that make up a Roman consulship campaign. He's officially running for the highest office in the Republic: consul, co-leader of the state, master of public funds, and part-time referee for Senate brawls. It's the peak of the political ladder, and Caesar is climbing fast, but he knows he can't do it alone, so he calls in some friends. One of them is Crassus, of course, Rome's favorite miser, who continues to fund Caesar's rise like a reluctant patron saint of debt. The other? Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, a war hero, beloved by the army, and possibly the only Roman alive whose ego can go toe-to-toe with Caesar's and walk away with a limp. Then there's Marcus Licinius Lucullus, briefly, but Caesar sidelines him with a smile and a subtle insult about fish sauce. Instead, he forms what history now calls the First Triumvirate. At the time, it's just three ambitious men who realize that together, they can get whatever they want. Pompey brings popularity, Crassus brings cash, and Caesar brings charisma, and the ability to make even legal reforms sound sexy. You walk with him through the forum, where crowds cheer his name and vendors now sell flatbread with his face stamped into the crust. He kisses babies, praises grain prices, and pretends not to notice when senators glare at him like they've swallowed sour olives. Then the election happens, and he wins. Consul Caesar. It sounds almost too neat, but this is Rome, and neat things tend to get messy. His co-consul, Bibulus, is a conservative wet blanket who tries to veto everything Caesar proposes. So Caesar just ignores him. Literally. At one point, Bibulus retreats to his home and declares that all political business is now suspended due to bad omens. Caesar thanks him for his concern and passes every bill anyway. You see him reform land distribution, passing laws to help Pompey's veterans settle down with dignity and small farms. The Senate tries to protest. Caesar smiles, nods politely, and reminds them of their own hypocrisy with such flair that even his opponents momentarily forget why they're mad. Of course, this makes him deeply unpopular with the old guard. Cato scowls. Cicero sighs dramatically. Brutus, yes, that Brutus, is still young and mostly just confused, but the people love him. And Rome? Rome is humming that he hosts games again, larger than ever. Gladiators clash beneath colored awnings. Exotic beasts are paraded through the Circus Maximus. One night, he even arranges a theatrical reenactment of one of Pompey's battles using actual ships in a flooded arena. Someone in the audience faints from the sheer ridiculousness of it all. And yet, through it all, Caesar remains focused, because while everyone else is watching the fireworks, he's planning his next move: governorship of Gaul. A post that offers military command, massive territory, and all the space he needs to grow his legend. Toward the end of his consulship, you catch him standing on the Capitoline Hill, Looking west, he's not admiring the view, he's looking toward France. And even though it's full of tribes, mud, and people who still think trousers are acceptable, Caesar sees it not as a wild frontier, but as a blank page, ready for conquest. Section 10. You're trudging through Gallic mud now. Thick, sticky stuff that clings to your sandals like it has personal grievances. The sky is gray, the trees are dripping, and the air smells of pine needles and anxiety. But up ahead, Caesar rides high on a well-groomed horse, perfectly dry and, somehow, faintly amused. He's finally where he wants to be, in charge, in Gaul, and absolutely not under the thumb of any senator back in Rome. He's not just governor of Gaul. He's now the commander of several legions, seasoned soldiers who've marched more miles than most senators have walked in their lives. And Caesar? He doesn't just command them. He enchants them. The Gallic Wars are about to begin. But let's be honest, it starts with a very long hike. Caesar spends the first few months marching. North, west, then north again. Through forests, across rivers, past terrified villages that speak Celtic dialects and look at Romans like they've just seen ghosts in sandals. He writes everything down. Or rather, he dictates it to scribes. Dry, third-person reports that somehow still sound like humble brags. Caesar did this. Caesar crossed that river. Caesar gently conquered several thousand people before lunch. You start to notice a pattern. A tribe resists. He offers them peace. They decline. He crushes them. Then writes, they brought this upon themselves. One of his first major opponents is the Helvetii, a Swissish tribe migrating across Gaul, mostly to avoid being crushed by other tribes. Caesar intercepts them, blocks their passage, and after some dramatic speeches and clever maneuvering, defeats them at the Battle of Bibracte. It's textbook Caesar. Outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and still victorious, he lets the survivors go back to their homeland. Why? Because he wants future tribes to think twice. Conquered people talk. And Caesar is building not just an empire, but a reputation. Then come the Belgae. Fierce northern tribes who fight like angry hornets with axes. Caesar defeats them too, using ambushes, bridges, and clever propaganda. One city surrenders because Caesar sends a letter saying, essentially, you could resist, but I did just conquer your neighbors in record time. Along the way, he builds roads, forts, bridges that seem to appear overnight. His engineers become legendary, and his troops learn to dig trenches faster than a startled mole. It's war, yes, but it's also construction. Some nights, you sit by the campfire and listen as Caesar walks the lines, chatting with soldiers. Not as a distant general, but like a favorite uncle who also happens to wield terrifying political power. He remembers names, jokes about rations, even takes part in dice games, though he somehow always wins. The troops call him the bald adulterer behind his back, but they'd follow him into Hades if he asked nicely. There's a brief pause between campaigns. Caesar returns to Cisalpine Gaul, modern-day northern Italy, to handle some paperwork and charm local governors. But he's restless. His mind is still in the forest that he writes, Commentarii de Bello Gallico, his famous commentaries. Dry, polished, almost clinical on the surface, but with just enough flair to make him sound like a reluctant hero forced into greatness. It's public relations through battlefield memoir. And Rome eats it up. Back in the Senate, reactions are mixed. The people adore him. The conservatives are nervous. Pompey smiles, but it's a little tighter now. Even Crassus is starting to wonder if the monster he funded is getting too big to leash. But Caesar isn't thinking about Rome right now, that he's thinking about a river, and a line no one has dared cross. Yet. Section 11. The winter snows have barely melted when Caesar starts to plan something audacious. You're standing with him near the banks of the Rhine, wide, cold, and furious, like a natural border drawn by an angry god. Beyond it lie the Germanic tribes. Unconquered, unbothered, unimpressed. Rome has traditionally avoided crossing this river. It's considered the edge of the known world, a boundary not just of geography, but of nerve. So naturally, Caesar decides to cross it. But not by boat. No, that would be far too ordinary. Instead, he builds a bridge, a massive, wooden, military-grade miracle of engineering. The kind of bridge that makes you wonder if Caesar is trying to move troops or just prove a point. In just 10 days, using local timber and the world's most exhausted construction crews, he spans the Rhine and leads his legions across. Marching into a land Rome had only pointed at from afar, the Germanic tribes scatter before him, more puzzled than afraid. Caesar doesn't conquer, he demonstrates. He stays long enough to send a message. Rome can reach you, even here, and then retreats, dismantling the bridge behind him with the flair of a magician ending a trick. Then he writes about it into Bello Gallico, with that trademark detached tone. Caesar thought it appropriate to cross. As if he just decided to borrow someone's ladder. Back in Gaul, unrest stirs again. The tribes are starting to catch on. Caesar isn't just passing through. He's here to stay. A rebellion simmers in Armorica, modern-day Brittany, and Caesar quashes it with such efficiency that even the Gauls begin whispering about omens. But not all is going Caesar's way. You start to hear rumblings. In Rome, politics are shifting. Crassus is growing colder, Pompey quieter. The alliance that once launched Caesar into the stratosphere is cracking like old plaster. And then, news arrives like a thunderclap. Crassus is dead. Killed in Parthia, his head allegedly used as a prop in a play. The kind of Roman detail that feels like satire, but is completely real. With Crassus gone, the triumvirate becomes a line, not a triangle. And Caesar is now more isolated than ever. Pompey begins to lean toward the Senate's conservative faction. He stays in Rome, gaining new powers, pretending to play neutral. Caesar, meanwhile, remains in Gaul, growing stronger by the month. His victories pile up like wine amphorae after a festival. You witness his most intense campaign yet, against Vercingetorix, the charismatic Gallic chieftain who finally unites the tribes into something resembling an actual resistance. They clash across fields, rivers, and fortified hill towns, culminating in the epic siege of Alesia. That it's brutal, cold, relentless. Caesar builds 2 sets of walls, one to keep the Gauls in and one to keep reinforcements out. His troops dig ditches, erect towers, and fight off attacks from both sides at once. Food runs low. Morale thins. Caesar himself joins the battle lines more than once, sword in hand, cloak muddied. Then, after weeks of fighting, the Gallic resistance collapses. Vercingetorix surrenders, not with a whimper, but with drama. He rides out in full armor, circles Caesar's camp, then dismounts and lays his sword at Caesar's feet. The general doesn't smile. He just nods that he's not savoring this moment. He's cataloging it. Back in Rome, they celebrate wildly. Caesar sends prisoners, loot, and letters dripping with modesty. The Senate grants him more honors, but also more suspicion. Whispers begin that he's been too long in Gaul, that he commands too much loyalty. He's not going to give up power willingly. And the worst part, they're not wrong. That night, you find Caesar riding by lamplight again. A list sits beside his elbow. Names of allies, names of enemies. And at the top, in neat script, just one question. Will Pompey choose Rome or me? Section 12. The rain is falling hard now, fat. Cold drops that splatter against armor and echo through the marble corridors of distant Roman halls. You're with Caesar in northern Italy, where the climate is damp and the politics even damper. Gaul is conquered, mostly. His legions are seasoned, loyal, and very well fed thanks to years of spoils. But Caesar isn't celebrating. He's calculating. The Senate back in Rome has grown increasingly agitated. Caesar's term as governor is nearly up, and they expect, no, demand, that he disband his army and return as a private citizen. Without troops, he can be charged, prosecuted, possibly exiled. Maybe worse. For Caesar, The choice is clear: come home alone and vulnerable or march. You're standing beside him on the banks of a shallow, unimpressive stream called the Rubicon. It's not wide, not dramatic, and not even particularly clean. But crossing it with an army is an act of war, a line drawn by law. The moment Caesar steps over, he becomes a rebel. He hesitates. Then, with a quiet, almost amused expression, he says, "Alia I acta est." The die is cast, and he crosses. Word travels faster than hoofbeats. In Rome, panic breaks like a fever. Pompey, now allied with the Senate, flees the city along with most of its elite. They head south, gathering troops, hoping to buy time. Caesar? He marches in, unopposed. The people cheer. Bread prices drop. No one's been stabbed in the Forum yet. Things are going great. You follow him as he moves south through Italy like a warm wind. Towns open their gates. Former enemies suddenly become silent allies. Caesar sends messages, not threats, inviting reconciliation, offering peace. But it's not really about peace. It's about positioning. The real fight is coming. Pompey gathers his forces in Greece. Caesar, in a display of astonishing audacity and seasickness tolerance, chases him across the Adriatic. There, at Pharsalus, the two giants finally clash. Pompey has more men, more cavalry, more grain. Caesar has. Caesar, the battle is textbook brilliance. He places a hidden reserve of infantry behind his lines, uses them to counter Pompey's cavalry, and breaks the enemy's flank like it was made of dry breadsticks. Pompey's forces collapse. Many surrender. Some run. Pompey himself flees, by sea, to Egypt. Caesar follows, only to find Pompey already dead, assassinated by Egyptian officials eager to impress the new Roman power. They present Caesar with Pompey's head in a jar. You watch him take it in silence. He doesn't smile. He doesn't gloat. He weeps, not for Pompey, necessarily, but for the republic that died with him. For the years wasted on a rivalry that should have been a partnership. Or maybe he's just tired. Egypt, however, proves distracting, because there, waiting like a perfectly scripted plot twist, is Cleopatra, young, brilliant, cunning, and unapologetically dramatic. She meets Caesar not with a scroll but by rolling herself out of a rug, probably silk, and into his political plans. They talk late into the night about philosophy, kingdoms, and taxes. The kind of things that keep romantic despots up at night. She becomes his ally. Possibly more. Together, they restore her to the throne. Together, they host feasts, sail the Nile, and rewrite headlines. And though Caesar eventually returns to Rome, Cleopatra follows. With their baby, whose name Caesarion isn't exactly subtle. Rome is confused. Some are charmed. Others are horrified. A few are mostly just jealous. Caesar shrugs, builds Cleopatra a fancy villa, and reminds the Senate that he has more pressing issues like reorganizing the calendar. Yes, the calendar. Because while most men fight over borders and statues, Caesar rewrites time itself. Introducing the Julian calendar, which is so successful we still use its bones today. He adds leap years, shortens months, and tries to explain February with a straight face. It works. Mostly. And yet, as always, the more he reforms, the more enemies he gathers. Old senators whisper behind colonnades. Friends nod too politely. And someone, maybe several someones, start sharpening knives in the dark. But Caesar doesn't look back. He's too busy moving forward. And you, standing just behind him, can feel the momentum now. Like a great wheel turning faster than anyone expected. Faster than it was ever meant to. Section 13. Rome has never been quieter. You stand beside Caesar on the Capitol steps, gazing out at the Forum below, a space that once roared with debates and shouted curses, now filled with an eerie hush. The statues haven't moved, but somehow they seem to lean in, listening. Even the pigeons seem unusually polite. Because Caesar isn't just a military hero anymore. He's Rome's dictator. Not in the ugly modern sense, full of shouting and tanks, but in the very Roman, very legal sense. Dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. A title that was once temporary, emergency only, pulled from a dusty shelf during crisis. Caesar has taken that emergency and made it policy. Wrapped it in silk, carved it into stone. Some cheer. Bread is cheap. Taxes are better. The streets are cleaner. Others frown. Because Rome is built on a strange political magic trick, pretending that no one is really in charge while secretly letting someone be in charge as long as they're humble about it. Caesar is not humble. And worse, he looks good in a crown. He doesn't wear one. Not exactly. Not in public. But he flirts with the idea. The diadem appears at festivals, at processions, in theater performances where the actor playing Caesar wears it a bit too convincingly. People start to ask, is he a king? Romans hate kings. Absolutely loathe them. The entire republic was founded on kicking one out. So when Mark Antony, ever the chaos goblin, tries to crown Caesar during the Lupercalia festival, right there in front of everyone, things get weird. Caesar pushes it away. Once. Then again. Then shrugs as if to say, oh, stop it. But you saw it. He wanted it. He was just waiting for you to want it too. Meanwhile, he's been reorganizing everything. The Senate? Doubled in size. Filled with loyalists from Gaul, Spain, and anywhere else that ever sent him a fruit basket. He reforms the courts, the tax system, even urban planning. He grants citizenship more generously. Makes Roman life smoother, more efficient, more, well, Caesarian. And still, the honors come. Statues. Temples. A seat among the gods. Someone carves to the unconquered god into a pedestal, and nobody even blinks. You find him one night, sitting alone with a scroll and a small glass of wine. The scroll is full of appointments, governors for provinces, judges for trials, land to be distributed. His handwriting is calm, clean. Final. He is building a new Rome, brick by brick, under his name, with his rules, but he can't quite finish, because around him, others are building something else. A conspiracy. It starts small. Quiet lunches, walks in gardens, letters passed with too few words. Cassius leads it. Brutus hesitates. Others join, senators, idealists, nervous men who miss being relevant. They claim they're saving the republic, but really, they miss the days when they mattered more than one man. Even Cleopatra notices the mood change. She visits Caesar in secret, urges him to be careful. He smiles, kisses her hand, and promises everything is under control. It is not. He shrugs off a bodyguard offer. Says he's too loved to need one. He ignores omens, a stormy night, a dream of blood, a soothsayer whispering, beware the Ides of March. You remember that whisper. It lands in the air like a dropped knife. And Caesar, he just laughs. Section 14. The morning of March 15th arrives like any other. Rome yawns awake, vendors set up their stalls, and somewhere, a goat sneezes in the general direction of the Senate. But beneath the usual chaos, something is off. The air feels tighter. Watchful. You're with Caesar in his villa, where he lingers longer than usual. A servant draws back the curtains. Another offers breakfast. Someone hands him his scrolls for the day. The Ides of March, it says on the calendar. Just another session at the Curia Pompeia, the temporary Senate house. But even Caesar looks slightly hesitant. His wife, Calpurnia, is pale. She clutches his arm, begging him not to go. She had a dream, she says, bloody statues, wailing winds, his name echoing from empty streets. Caesar listens, nods. For a moment, he seems ready to cancel his appearance. Then Decimus arrives. Loyal Decimus, his friend, his general, smiling too wide. The senators await you, he says gently. They'll think you're weak if you stay home. And so, Caesar puts on his toga. He steps into the litter. And the procession moves through the narrow streets. People bow. Bakers offer bread. Children shout his name. You can almost forget that everyone in Rome seems to be holding their breath. At the Curia, the conspirators are already in place. Brutus, Cassius, Casca, others. They make small talk. Joke about grain prices. Sweat under their cloaks. Caesar enters. Smiling. Relaxed. Someone hands him a petition, a legal matter. Meaningless. He squints at it. A crowd closes in. a little too close. He looks up, sees a face that shouldn't be afraid, but is. Then the first blow. It lands on his shoulder. Clumsy. He turns. This is violence. Another comes. A dagger this time. Then another. And another. They strike in silence, like a swarm of startled bees. Caesar staggers. Reaches out, not for help, but as if steadying history itself. He sees Brutus. Et too, Brute? You too. It's not betrayal. It's confirmation. He stops resisting. They stab until there is nothing left to stab. When it's over, 23 wounds bloom across his body. He slumps at the foot of Pompey's statue, drenched in irony. The senators flee. Rome falls silent. And Caesar, for all his ambition, lies still. But even in death, he doesn't disappear, because Rome isn't done with him. You see it in the days that follow. Mark Antony gives a funeral speech that starts polite and ends in a riot. The crowd tears down buildings. Brutus and Cassius flee, not as heroes, but hunted men. The Republic is already dissolving in grief and fury. And then comes the will. Caesar leaves money for every Roman citizen, gifts for the poor, land for veterans, and names a surprising heir, Octavian. A teenager, quiet, bookish, with eyes like cold water. The wheel begins to turn again. Section 15. You return to the streets of Rome, but they don't look the same. There's something ghostly about them now. The marble glints too white in the sun. The forum echoes with a strange hollowness. The people walk a little quicker, speak a little softer. Because Caesar's shadow hasn't left. It lingers, longer than any man has a right to linger. His body may be gone, burned on a pyre so massive that the flames leapt toward the heavens. But his presence has only expanded. Murals go up. Coins are minted. Senators argue not whether to remember him, but how. Even the month of July now bears his name. The man who once joked with pirates is now a permanent part of the calendar. You find Mark Antony pacing the steps of the temple. He's angrier than before, more theatrical. He's wearing Caesar's cloak, the same one that was stabbed, now stiff with old blood. He brandishes it during speeches, shaking it like a holy relic. Crowds cry. Some faint. One man starts a fist fight with a marble column. Antony wants revenge. Wants justice. Wants to be Caesar 2.0. But there's a new contender. Gaius Octavius. Octavian. Caesar's adopted son by will. Barely 19 and already gathering troops with the quiet, deadly focus of someone who's been underestimated his entire life. He doesn't rant, doesn't throw festivals, just moves steadily through the Republic's cracks, turning whispers into loyalty. Antony underestimates him. So do the conspirators. And so begins the slow unraveling of the old world. Brutus and Cassius flee to the east. They raise legions in the name of liberty. But their cause already sounds dated. Roman liberty, once a proud banner, now feels like the excuse of men who stabbed hope in the chest. You hear stories of ghostly figures appearing near Caesar's tomb, of storms rolling in suddenly, as if the gods themselves are uncertain what comes next, of a comet, bright and impossible, streaking across the sky during the funeral games. People call it the Sidus Iulium, the Julian star. Many believe it's Caesar's soul, ascending to the heavens. Officially, Rome now considers him a god. Unofficially, everyone is still terrified. Octavian joins forces, temporarily, with Antony and Lepidus. They form the Second Triumvirate, a colder, crueler echo of Caesar's original alliance. Together, they begin the proscriptions, a list of enemies, executed or exiled, their names posted publicly like grocery specials. Cicero, the great orator, ends up on that list. His tongue is nailed to a podium. It's a message. Caesar's killers meet their ends too. At Philippi, Brutus falls on his sword. Cassius dies thinking the battle is lost before it actually is. They believed they were saving Rome. They didn't understand that Rome no longer wanted to be saved. Eventually, even Antony and Octavian turn on each other. Antony falls for Cleopatra. Again, Octavian turns that into a campaign. paints her as a foreign witch, Antony as a traitor, and marches toward the final war of the Republic. And when it's over, Octavian stands alone. He takes no royal title, just princeps, first citizen. But the Senate bows. The people cheer. The Republic sighs and quietly expires. Rome becomes an empire, and the first emperor calls himself Caesar. Not just a name now, a title, a dynasty, a legend. You sit quietly now, under a tree near the old forum. The stars above are still. The comets have faded. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it, the faint echo of sandals on marble, of speeches swirling through colonnades, of a man who once stood before pirates and dared them to treat him like a king. He wasn't wrong. He just beat them to it. You lie back now, letting the stones of Rome fade beneath you. The streets grow quieter, the light softens. The echoes of sandals and senators have stilled, and the forum is only a memory, warm and dusted in gold. Caesar is gone, long gone. But not really. He lingers in the rustle of togas, in the way people say power, in calendars that still bear his month. His name is no longer just a name. It's a crown passed down, worn by emperors, borrowed by kingdoms, whispered by those chasing something larger than themselves. Kaiser, Tsar, Caesar. But beneath all that, he was still the boy who climbed fig trees, who whispered speeches to statues, who looked at the stars and thought, I belong there too. And maybe he does. Maybe that bright comet they saw after his funeral really was him, streaking across the night. Not as a warning, but as a wink. A reminder that legends don't end. They just drift further into the sky. Now the noise of Rome fades into a soft hum. A fan turns. A breath slows. Your eyes flutter. And somewhere, far above, the Julian star keeps shining. Sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.